Hello, everybody. This is Brian David Johnson, the guest editor of the IEEE Computer Magazine for the issue on the world of making. And as we went around and pulled together this issue, we looked at lots of different areas. We looked at people doing work in biology and design, people who come from the worlds of science and business and technology, people doing work in entertainment and education, and also just folks who are doing work in culture in general. And the whole idea was to pull from all these disparate areas to capture a snapshot of making all around the world in the year 2014. And today on the podcast, we have Carla Diana. Now, Carla is doing some really amazing work in experiments in 3D printed design and distribution. So, Carla, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, Carla, you've got a really kind of interesting background. You've kind of come to making in an interesting way. Could you share with our listeners kind of what some of your background is and what was your entrance into the world of making?
Sure. So I was always a kid who loved taking things apart and loved math, but also really loved creativity and art. And I originally studied mechanical engineering and worked as a mechanical engineer for several years, and then eventually went back to school for a degree in industrial design, and wound up focusing a lot of my career around designing physical things that had some kind of digital component. So things like dishwashers and microwave ovens and handheld cameras and a lot of medical devices and a car interior. So my entry point to making has been, in doing that kind of work, it's very important to try things out and to prototype. And so I always felt like it was really important to get my hands dirty. And so when really wonderful, accessible prototyping tools like the Arduino, and there were a few others before that, emerged, I was, really voracious about making sure I got my hands on it, and it really allowed me to be creative with the design process in a way that I never could before.
And it's so interesting, Carla, that you come from that area, as you say, of industrial design and mechanical design, because how I first heard of you and how many of these listeners may have first heard of you would have been through your really amazing book, Leo the Maker Prints. We share a publisher there, and if the folks haven't actually seen Carla's book, Leo the Maker Prints, you've got to see it, because it's for so many people, it is an entry point for them to understand the maker movement, but also understand kind of 3D printing. So, Carla, how did you come to do the book, and also your ideas in your article about experiments in 3D printed design and distribution? Mm-hmm. How did you come to all of that?
Yeah, so my career's kind of evolved so that lately I've been a lot more focused on the future and what's the future of design, and I've been doing a bit more writing and public speaking and teaching in that area. And, when I get excited about something, it's a trigger for me to want to do something very public about it. So, 3D printing is something that I had used for at least a decade, but it was always extremely expensive and only for, the very most precious, most high-end clients or, research laboratories at universities. And so, when the maker movement was emerging with a lot of the DIY 3D printers, and I realized that the desktop 3D printer was going to become a reality, I knew I had to do a project about it. And I began talking to experts at some of the 3D printing companies about, what is this future going to be? Where are we going to see it? Are we going to have one in every home? And the answer I got was, well, we have a few ideas, but, nobody can know for sure. So, what I decided to do was take some of those ideas and then, write a story about them and illustrate them and just put the ideas into the minds of what I called our ambassadors to the future, which are the kids, And so that's how I came to deciding to write a children's book. And one of the things that's particularly special about the book is that there are a series of objects and there are characters that discover or make these objects. And anything that's a photograph of an object in the book can be downloaded and 3D printed by the readers. There's a URL that leads them to where the files are stored. And I wanted to do this because I felt like it's very important in any of my work to actually have my hands on the technology and be experimenting with it in real time, rather than just kind of writing about something that I had heard about. So for this project, it was very important to me to actually be making. And then when I realized that I could have this way of both making and writing, that was really exciting. So that's how the idea all came together.
And what has been the reaction to the book and to you kind of going on the book tour, if you will, of kind of going out and talking to people about that? Have you had some interesting reactions from folks?
Yeah, I've had amazing reactions. It's been a phenomenal experience. First of all, we got a lot of attention from the press with the book. Wired wrote about it, and the Telegraph London actually called it one of the 12 best gadgets of CES this year, which we weren't at CES, and it's not a gadget, and I thought that's kind of cool that it made this list of 12 best when it doesn't even satisfy a couple of the things. But the thing that's been the most heartwarming, of course, has been talking to readers and actually having little kids come up to me and ask me questions and say things like, is Leo real? Did you really meet him? Leo is the name of the robot. That's the main character in the book. That's a 3D printing robot. And, sometimes children will come up to me when I've been at a couple of the maker fairs, and they'll see the book, and I'll have some of the objects out there, and they'll recognize the objects, and they'll say, oh, is this Stephanie's jewelry from the 3rd chapter? And that just makes me feel like, okay, that's the most important thing, that the audience is actually connecting with it. And the thing that's been extra surprising is that people have been taking my fiction, then making a real object out of it. Say I have some toys that are musical instruments, and then I have a lot of the toys that are the characters of the book too. And what some people have been doing is actually printing them out and then creating their own stories around them. And this has been especially fascinating. So there's a teacher in West Virginia who goes by Design, Make, Teach, and he's been using the characters to teach some of his students about different aspects of technology. And another thing that was very surprising to me is I got an email a couple of months ago from Scotland. And the email said, hello, we are the first library in the UK to have a 3D printer, and we have your book, and we wanted to thank you for writing the book and having so many objects for us to print. And we are actually using the book with blind and otherwise visually impaired children so that they can have a tangible way to understand and feel what the characters and the objects are like in the story. And this really blew me away because it made me realize that, you can have an idea and put it out there in the world, and then it takes on a life of its own. And, people start to use it in ways that you hadn't even considered.
And with that in mind, you really created this platform, right? A platform both in storytelling, but also for people to get an idea of making, get an idea about 3D printing, but then for them to take that forward and use it as ways to kind of create more makers and more designers. Where do you see all of this going? So as Leo and all the characters make their way into other people's lives and people begin to see what you can do with 3D printing and what you can do with design of this way, where do you think this leads us?
Well, one of the really exciting things is, I worked on the book over a year and a half ago. And a lot of the things in the book were just kind of speculation, but now they're actually starting to emerge as reality. So there are more and more, let's say, neighborhood shops that are cropping up that have 3D printers, 3D printing services, which is one of the scenarios in the book. There's more and more food that's happening with 3D printing. There are businesses, like there's a business that has cropped up that's called Normal that is about customized headphones that perfectly fit your body because it's scanned, and which is akin to one of the scenarios that I have in the book with a little boy whose foot gets scanned by a scanning robot. And what's most exciting is that I see the potential for a new economy, and for communities that might otherwise have been isolated to be participating in object creation in a really global way. You can be. I just came back from a conference in West Virginia where there are a group of people that have a grant to really brainstorm around new economies and new ways of using the internet to generate businesses and create opportunity and build communities. And it was really exciting to me to present these ideas out there and tell people, hey, you could think about being someone who actually creates objects and distributes them. And, you don't have to worry that you're, shipping from a factory or you're warehousing things or even that you're not able to access your customers necessarily, because with the ability to store objects essentially in the cloud for download, you can think about creating all kinds of new businesses. So I think that that's one thing that's really exciting and interesting to me about it.
That is incredible. So, Carla Diana, if people want to get more information about you, your work, and also Leo the Maker Prints, where should they go?
So for more information about me and my work, I have a website that's carladiana.com. It's all one word, CarladiAna. And there's a website for the book and the larger project. It's called Leo the Maker Prints. Again, just kind of all one word in the URL. So leothemakerprints.com.
That's great. That's great. Well, Carla Diana, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Also, thank you for your contribution to the IEEE Computer Magazine. I think the work that you have been doing really makes 3D printing and also where 3D printing could take us in the future very accessible. And I think the work is really just amazing. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.